You can't live without your smartphone. Do you buy your tomatoes in the supermarket? As we go about our daily lives, human rights are often the last thing on our minds. Invisible Hands. Slavery in the 21st Century. Starting December 10th on DW.
This is DW News live from Berlin. A revolutionary life. Former Cuban leader Fidel Castro has died at the age of 90. We'll have a look back at the way he shaped Cuba and how he'll be remembered. Also coming up, the alternative Nobel Prize has been handed out in Sweden, but 2 of the 4 winners were prevented from accepting the award in person by their governments. And in the Bundesliga, it's the big derby between Hamburg and Bremen. With both teams in relegation trouble, the game could be more crucial than ever. I'm Marina Evanstein. Good to have you with us. Fidel Castro, Cuba's former president and leader of the Communist Revolution, has died at the age of 90. Remembered as the firebrand leader in rumpled fatigues, Castro survived countless assassination attempts and often joked about death. In the end, it was illness and old age that claimed him. His death was announced by his younger brother Raúl on state television.
Querido pueblo de Cuba, con profundo dolor.
Dear people of Cuba, with deep sadness, I inform our people, the friends of our America and the world, that today, November 25th, 2016, at 10:29 in the night, the Commander-in-Chief of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro Ruz, has died. According to the will of Comrade Fidel, his remains will be cremated.
Well, President Raúl Castro said that the details of the funeral will be announced in a few hours. Fidel Castro was a divisive figure, even long after passing the reins of power to his brother. For the last 10 years, he'd largely been absent from public life. The energetic leader gave way to a frail, elderly man. So how are ordinary Cubans responding to his death? We have these reactions from Havana.
Death is a normal part of life, but even so, it's something you're never prepared for, especially when the Commander-in-Chief dies. It's very painful for all of us. It's really affected me. I am quite sad. He was a figure everybody knew and respected. I feel quite bad.
Well, meanwhile, Cubans living in the U.S. state of Florida have been rejoicing at the news of Fidel Castro's death. Hundreds of people exiled from the communist state took to the streets of Miami, waving Cuban flags, cheering and honking car horns to celebrate the death of the revolutionary leader. Many Cubans living abroad saw Castro as a ruthless tyrant who was responsible for crippling the Cuban economy. Well, Fidel Castro rose to become an iconic figure of the 20th century. After leading a rebel army to victory in Cuba, he embraced Soviet-style communism. He was a thorn in the side of 10 U.S. presidents during his half-century rule. His supporters say he gave Cuba back to its people. But for critics, he was a dictator who deprived Cubans of their basic rights. We have this look back at Castro's revolutionary life.
With his beard, cigar and olive green combat fatigues, Fidel Castro was an icon of the 20th century. Castro symbolised both the independence struggle in the Third World as well as the failure of socialism. In 1959, after years of struggle, Castro's rebels were able to drive dictator Batista out of Cuba. In Havana, there were scenes of celebration. The poor especially had high hopes. For the first time, there was education and access to medical care for all. Major landowners and industrialists lost their businesses, including many Americans. The US responded furiously and put Cuba under a trade embargo. Cuba turned toward the Soviet Union. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The Soviets deployed nuclear missiles on the US's doorstep. United States President John F. Kennedy ordered a naval blockade of Cuba. After tense negotiations, the Soviets withdrew the missiles. Standing up to the US won Fidel Castro's support in the developing world. But at home, his dictatorship became ever more severe. The support of the Soviet Union helped Cubans enjoy moderate prosperity for a time. But the collapse of the USSR in 1991 devastated Cuba's economy. Increasing numbers of Cubans tried to escape by sea. The Marxist leader was forced to change course. Private markets were legalised, as was the use of the US dollar. By the end of the 1990s, the worst was over, thanks to aid from oil-rich neighbour Venezuela. Fidel Castro was increasingly frail. In July 2006, he fell seriously ill. He handed over official business to his brother Raúl, at first only temporarily, and then in 2008 permanently. In September 2010, Castro gave his final public speech. For the last time, thousands of spectators turn out in front of the Museum of the Revolution in Havana. Castro's public appearances became increasingly rare. He occasionally met privately with world leaders, like Pope Benedict in 2012. He last appeared in public at a gala for his 90th birthday 3 months ago. To the end, Fidel Castro was a divisive figure. To some, a brutal dictator. To others, the embodiment of revolution.
Let's now bring in journalist Bettina Poileka, who is in Havana. Bettina, I think it's safe to say that for better or for worse, Fidel Castro has had a profound impact on Cuba. How are people in Havana taking the news of his death?
Honestly, well, first of all, of course, he had this profound influence, but people are just basically really waking up to the news because it happened in the middle of the night, and I myself was not really aware of it. I was taking somebody to the airport, and then I came back, and nobody had known. It was not announced yet, so not that many people are aware of what has happened already, and it will have to be seen during the day how the reactions on the streets in the morning will be.
Well, Castro has been out of the limelight for quite a long time, nearly 10 years. He was very ill. He withdrew from the public sphere. And nevertheless, what kind of an impact is his death likely to have on Cuba as a country?
That also, of course, has to be seen. I mean, he will be remembered for his courage and for his dreams and for his perseverance. I mean, he achieved many things, so he is an icon. He is a symbol, as it has been said before, and people will mourn him for that. For nothing else, he will be remembered with respect, and the future will now be in the hands of his brother. I was here coincidentally 2 years ago when the diplomatic relations with the US were announced again, and then we had a reaction that I think could be an analogy to what is going to happen now, because the faithful hardliners, the so-called Fidelistas, were skeptical about what was going to happen with the new opening, the new change. The Raúlistas, those who are and were and are with his brothers, are the more realistic people. So probably now that Fidel is gone and he is past of the past, so to speak, the economic necessities that call for new moves might be easier to achieve with his brother without the other part still there.
All right, Bettina Poileka talking to us from Havana. Many thanks indeed.
Many thanks to you. Bye.
Well, it is known as the Alternative Nobel Prize, and it was handed out in Stockholm last night. But 2 of the 4 recipients were blocked from attending the ceremony in person. They include the chairman of the Turkish daily newspaper Cumhuriyet, who was barred from traveling from Turkey. The pro-opposition paper has been targeted by the Turkish government's crackdown on the media.
The prize recognizes invaluable contributions to the areas of democracy, human rights and peace. This year, 4 recipients are sharing the laurels. The editorial staff at the Turkish opposition newspaper Cumhuriyet are being honored for their ongoing struggle for freedom of expression. Egyptian feminist leader Mohsen Hassan was awarded the prize for her work promoting women's rights and gender equality. She couldn't accept the prize in person as she is under a government travel ban. She's being prosecuted for illegally receiving foreign funds. There's a trial against her and she's not allowed to leave. The White Helmets are a group of nearly 3,000 volunteer rescue workers operating in Syria. They dig survivors out of the rubble after airstrikes in places like Aleppo. More than 140 of them have been killed. This prize will give our colleagues new motivation, and we can again connect with the world and show them how bad things really are. The Russian human rights activist Svetlana Ganushkina won her share of the €300,000 prize for her work with refugees and migrants in Russia. The jury says it's honoring all the recipients for their visionary and exemplary solutions to the most urgent challenges facing the world today.
Sports news now, and in soccer, the RB Leipzig juggernaut shows no sign of stopping. The East German side rolled into Freiburg and came away with a 4-1 win to put them 6 points clear at the top of the Bundesliga. Leipzig flew out of the blocks, Naby Keita with a goal after 80 seconds. Florian Niederlechner leveled, but Freiburg could not stem the tide. 2 goals from Timo Werner put his team 3-1 up and meant the game was over going into the break. There's now daylight between unbeaten Leipzig and the chasing pack. Well, staying with the Bundesliga, where Hamburg and Bremen renew one of Germany's fiercest local rivalries in just a few hours. The 2 sides will meet in the 105th edition of the Northern Derby. Both teams have struggled so far this season, but hosts Hamburg are in especially deep water. They're rock bottom on the table and need to turn things around quickly.
Hamburg escaped to a 2-day training camp ahead of the Derby weekend. The perfect preparation, according to coach Marcus Gisdol.
It's a way to get up to speed quickly, like you usually have in pre-season. When you're trying to change things, you want everyone together to take an active role.
Hamburg have finally found the net again after a barren start to the campaign. They've scored 4 of their 6 goals this season in their last 2 games. They're still less potent than any other team, but now they're up against the weakest defence in the league. Opponents Bremen are hoping Max Kruse and Claudio Pizarro can help them find form after the 2 forwards returned from injury last weekend.
We don't want to mess about at the bottom of the table, but it takes time to get the team playing again, especially now when players are coming back and we have to get used to playing together.
The Northern Derby sees 2 struggling rivals face off. 3 points for either side could breathe life into their stuttering season.
The controversial British photographer David Hamilton, best known for his nude images of young girls, has died at his home in Paris at the age of 83. The circumstances of his death are unclear. Some media reports suggest he may have killed himself. Hamilton made his name in the 1960s with soft focus pictures of teenage girls published by major magazines. He had recently denied accusations that he had in the past raped several of his models. A reminder now of the top story we're following for you. Fidel Castro, Cuba's former president and leader of the communist revolution, has died at the age of 90. An iconic figure, Castro was revered by his supporters for being a defender of social justice. To critics, he was a repressive tyrant whose grip on power lasted half a century. His brother and current Cuban president, Raul Castro, announced Fidel's death on state television. His remains will be cremated later today. You're watching DW News in Berlin. We'll be back at the top of the hour with your news update. In the meantime, you can always get the latest news and information on our website. That's at dw.com. I'm Mariana Evanstein. Thanks for watching.